Welcome to the TV Lounge, a place where we get together to view and discuss lesser-known TV series. You know, there are plenty of places to discuss the latest hit shows, but we're here to tell you about some older programs you might not have heard of or watched. Some are quite good, and others, well, they're worthy of discussion and dissection. So have a seat here in the extra recliner and join us in the TV Lounge. Welcome to the first regular episode of the TV Lounge podcast. I'm John Bailey, and I'm here with my co-host, my son, Andy. Hi, Andy.
Hey, Dad.
So, I realized something. On our previous podcast, the introductory episode where we talked about what the TV Lounge was going to be all about, we didn't introduce ourselves very much. This is actually my second podcast. I also have Batwings Beat over at batwingsbeat.com. As far as TV viewing goes, my first memories of TV are from the 50s when I was a little boy. But there's a period in my life when there was no television in the early 60s. See, we were outside the country and there was no television at all. So as far as the TV Lounge goes, I'm really looking forward to not only visiting some of the shows that I grew up with, but I'm looking forward to seeing some of the shows that I probably missed as well. You, on the other hand, this is your first podcasting experience, isn't it?
Yep, first podcast. Unlike you, I have zero voice experience, but it'll be fun. And I think it'll be fun to go back and look at a lot of those shows too. Now, you said, so did you not have TV through, like, how much of the 60s did you not have TV?
We were outside the country from 1961 through 1966. And where we lived, there was no television at all. We had radio, but there was no television service whatsoever. So I missed a whole bunch of shows in the early 60s.
Now, so am I right then? Did you miss the Batman TV series from the 60s? I thought you saw that, but...
Actually, it started while we were still outside the country. And when we came back, my brother and I were both really excited to see this Batman show with Adam West.
Right.
Because we'd heard about it, but we'd never seen it. I think it was on a Thursday night. We sat down and we turned on this first episode of Batman. And it's kind of like, oh, really?
Yeah, that had to be disappointing. I mean, 'cause you read the comics over there, right? So I can't imagine how disappointing the TV series would have been.
Yeah, we were used to this Batman of the comic books. To see this being played so campy and so, it really was kind of a major disappointment to us.
Yeah, I can imagine.
We missed quite a bit in the early 60s, and off the top of my head, I can't think of any specific shows that we missed that I would want to go back and visit again. But I'm sure that as we explore shows on the TV Lounge, we'll come across some things that I either missed some of or missed completely. And a lot of shows that I know that you didn't see growing up because you didn't start watching TV till, the 80s?
Yeah, like the first, probably one of the earliest shows I remember, well, Knight Rider, obviously. That I would have been probably 4 or 5 years old. That one probably stands out the most in my mind. But I think I'd like to go back and kind of see a lot of these other shows that were around. And I think, for me, I have a background in film. I've got a film degree and done, some filmmaking. And I don't know, I'm kind of looking forward to going back and looking at some older, more obscure shows, even shows that may have kind of influenced future TV shows, like Babylon 5, just for an example, kind of made some revolutionary things, and it'll be fun to go back and look at a lot of these other more obscure shows too.
I think so, and I think that now, as far as the TV Lounge podcast goes, I think what we're going to try and do at first is, because of our schedules, my work schedule, your schedule, we're going to try and put this out on a bi-weekly basis.
Yeah.
But we're not we're not going to guarantee that until we can kind of develop a good rhythm here. But what do you say we go ahead and jump into the first episode of the TV Lounge, and we're going to start with the very first episode of Crime Traveler.
Sounds good.
And with that, let's go ahead and jump into our episode recap, following which we'll have some thoughts about the episode. Detective Jeff Slade and other officers pull up to a stakeout. They're waiting for a man named Silberman at the train station. Slade's boss, Kate Grissom, says they're not to move in unless it looks like Silberman is going to run.
Remember, we have nothing, not one shred of evidence that ties Silberman to this so-called Mansion House murders.
Except we know we did them.
Yes, Slade, which is why this is a watch-and-wait operation. We only move in if we think he's going to run, understood?
Yes, Chief. Right, Chief.
Slade?
With you all the way, Chief.
Well, that makes a change. Right, let's go.
While waiting for Silberman, Slade notices a woman approaching the station. It's Holly Turner, the science officer from the police station. She appears to be somewhat flustered and keeps looking around to see if anyone is looking at her. Silberman finally shows up, but he spots a member of the stakeout team, Nicky, talking on his walkie-talkie. Slade decides that Silberman's going to make a run for it, so he goes after Silberman against Grissom's wishes, and a chase ensues. Slade swipes a motorcycle and takes off after Silberman's car. He chases him into a multi-story car garage. Silberman tries to ram Slade against a wall, but he misses and crashes through the wall, landing in a nearby canal. Silberman is killed in the crash. Back at the police station, Grissom is not pleased.
In my office, Slade.
Wait a minute, Chief. This is...
Wait a minute. I have been waiting for months. And now what do we have? Thousands of pounds worth of damage, 2 people in hospital, and not only do we not make an arrest, we don't even have a body to put on the mortuary slab.
We're still dredging the river.
Oh, yes. And with your luck, Slade, Silberman will probably float downstream and turn up at the local regatta.
Chief.
Why you disobeyed my orders and destroyed the entire operation because you felt it. You type up that report and then you get out of here.
Oh, you're suspending me again?
Oh, no, I'm not suspending you. This time you are out for good.
While Grissom is firing Slade, Nicky fills Holly in on what happened. Slade's firing distresses Holly, and she tells Slade that Silberman was a monster and wonders why Silberman was at the station in the first place. Slade's reply is that if he could turn back time and ask Silberman, he would.
Grissom's overreacting. I mean, nobody is asking the most obvious question. What was Silberman doing at the station?
Holly, please, if I could turn back the clock and go and ask him, I would, but I can't because he's dead.
Holly leaves and goes straight home, where the building maintenance man, Danny, has a package for her.
UCX Electronics.
That's the one.
The man said it was a bi-dimensional transmuter. Is that what you were expecting?
Yes, that's right.
Excuse me for asking, but what exactly would you use a bi-transmutable transmuter for?
To dry my hair.
Holly goes to her apartment and sits down at her time machine. She proceeds to travel back 3 hours. Before she leaves, she takes a timer from the machine, which has a 3-hour countdown on it. It's now earlier that morning. She goes to the train station where Slade and the others are waiting for Silberman. She follows Silberman and sees him leave a bag at the luggage counter. As she leaves, it's then that Slade notices her. Holly rushes home and places the timer back into the machine with only seconds to spare, and the time machine returns her to the present.
And back at the station, we see Slade cleaning up things on his desk. Detective Morris is talking to Nicky about betting on the horse races, and Slade makes some digs at Morris.
Here, Nicky. Fancy a tenner on a Challenger's Cup?
What?
Mr. Cass. 40-1. I've got a tip.
I don't bet. And his horses don't win. What was the last tip you gave me, Morris? Limping boy? Or was it bag of bones?
You know, I ain't gonna miss you.
Holly returns to the police department and calls Slade to her office. When she went back in time, she retrieved the bag that Silberman left at the train station. Now we see Slade talking to Grissom about how he retrieved the bag. The bag contains a large knife, from which Holly has managed to lift Silberman's fingerprints, and the blood on the knife is 3 different types, most probably matching those of the people he killed. Finding the knife saves Slade his job. Slade thanks Holly for helping him save his job, but he's puzzled about how she could have got to the train station and back in half an hour.
Well, I just can't work out how you did it. There was no way you could have got to the station, checked the left luggage and got back again in half an hour.
I was lucky with the traffic.
You were there, weren't you?
Where?
At the station this morning.
No.
I saw you. But at the same time, I knew you were also here. Strange, isn't it?
Later, we see Holly and Slade in a nearby cafe where she tells Slade about her time machine. Slade doesn't believe her at all. Holly leaves, wishing she had never told Slade, and at this point, Nikki enters the restaurant telling Slade of another case Grisham has assigned them to. Businessman Guy Lombard has been found dead in a locked room with a gun in his hand, a supposed suicide. However, Lombard was in the process of selling his company, which would have made him an extremely rich man, not the sort of time to commit suicide. While looking around the crime scene, Slade notices a broken lamp in the garden.
Grissom tells Slade to investigate, starting with the caterers who earlier tried to make a fast getaway from the residence. Grissom had them detained in a room and assigned Morris to keep an eye on the caterers, but when Slade arrives, they're gone. Morris confesses he had to take a quick bathroom break and left the room unguarded for only a minute. Nikki finds a napkin on the floor of the room. It's from the same restaurant where Slade and Holly had lunch. A car is heard outside. The caterers, a Mr. and Mrs. Wilson, are leaving. Slade orders Morris after them, and Nikki puts out an alert. As Slade walks from the crime room, a man stops him. It's Lombard's son, Michael, who for some reason calls him Wilson. He claims that Slade was at the house in the morning to do the catering for his father.
Wilson? What are you doing up here?
Sorry, you're talking to me?
Well, what are you doing? What's going on?
My name's not Wilson.
What do you mean? You were here this morning.
Who are you?
I'm Michael Lombard. You know perfectly well.
Wait a minute, are you saying you've seen me here before?
You came here this morning for the catering.
The Wilsons were hired to cook a celebratory meal after the deal Lombard was working on had been signed.
Slade then realizes that if he was there that morning, he must have time traveled. He seeks out Holly and says he now believes her and wants to time travel. Holly is reluctant, but Slade persuades her and she takes him to her apartment to see the time machine. On the way, they pass a betting establishment. Slade asks a man about the result of the big horse race.
Oh, excuse me, sir. Did you hear the result of the Challengers Cup?
Yeah, Mr. Cash, 40-1.
Wow.
At Holly's apartment, she prepares the time machine and explains the rules of time travel they must follow.
How far will it send me back?
No way of saying. Could be a few hours, could be a week.
A week? How will I get back again?
You wait 7 days. Simple as that. You just live the same 7 days twice.
Do I get to meet myself?
Not unless you want to cause a temporal schism.
Oh dear, I don't want that. What else do I need to know?
We have to be back at the machine at the same moment, and I mean the same half second that we left.
What?
If we're late getting back, we'll be trapped in a loop of infinity. Always living the same days, travelling back in time and doing it all again. Even assuming we do travel back far enough, there is nothing you can do to prevent this crime from happening.
Are you going to try and stop me?
Time will stop you. If something has happened, it'll happen. It's one of the laws of time.
When she finishes, they hear a car crash outside and see the maintenance man Danny shouting at someone for not looking where they're going. Danny has wrecked his car.
Slade and Hunter then use the machine to travel back 10 hours. As they leave the apartment, they see Danny cleaning his car. But he just saw Danny wreck the car. This confirms to him that they have indeed traveled back in time. They then proceed to the caterers and pretend to be from the Department of Health. Slade arrests Mr. and Mrs. Wilson and ties them up. He and Holly take the catering van and drive to the Lombard house, where they pretend to be the Wilsons. Once in the house, Guy Lombard asks them to cook lunch to get a taste of what they can do. Slade volunteers Holly to make a cheese souffle, something which she doesn't know how to do.
You better get started on the old souffle then, Mrs. W.
I can't cook.
I beg your pardon? Are you telling me you can build a time machine, but you can't cook a cheese souffle? You've got your priorities all wrong.
At the same time, Guy Lombard exchanges words with his wife, Barbara, and it's obvious from the way Guy speaks that he isn't a very popular man. Barbara then shows Slade and Holly down to the kitchen. They meet Michael Lombard. Michael shows his obvious distaste for his father for selling the company. Slade takes up some coffee to Lombard's office, where he overhears Lombard's partner, Mark Redding, trying to persuade Guy not to sell. Back downstairs, Holly has put a souffle in the oven, but she has burnt the toast. Next, Holly is serving a rather anorexic souffle, and Slade is hunting around in Barbara Lombard's bedside table. He's looking for the murder weapon. He believes if he finds the gun, he can prevent the murder. When he does find the gun, he throws it into the bushes in the garden. As he and Holly are about to leave, Slade notices that the lamp in the garden isn't broken. He can't leave without finding out why. He runs back into the house to search through Lombard's desk while Holly waits downstairs. But he is caught by Lombard, who produces a second gun. Luckily for Slade, the Japanese buyer phones, and Lombard would rather talk to him than shoot Slade.
When Slade runs back upstairs, he gets there in time to see the door to Lombard's study close. He hears Lombard being shot 4 minutes earlier than when Grissom said he had been shot. The door is locked, so Slade goes out a window and climbs across to the balcony of Lombard's study. When he is just about to climb over the railing, someone points a gun out the window and shoots, just missing him. Unfortunately, it's enough to make Slade lose his grip, and he falls, landing in a swing hammock, and passes out. Holly finds him with a nasty cut on his head. She informs Slade that the local police and Grissom are in the house, which means the other Slade is on his way. They have to leave immediately. As they leave, Slade sees that the lamp is now broken. When they reach the catering truck, a local policeman stops them from leaving, and they're placed in the room upstairs. Meanwhile, Grissom is questioning the family and Mark Redding, and they're all saying nice things about Lombard.
Slade and Holly are trying to find a way out of the room with Morris standing guard. Slade knows that when he arrived at the room earlier, there was no one in it, so he knows that Holly and he escape. Luckily, Slade remembers Morris took a bathroom break, and while Morris leaves his station outside the door, they escape in the catering van. Slade parks the van in an alleyway near Holly's apartment. A couple of policemen spot them, and it becomes a race to get back to the time machine without the police catching them. They split up, and while separated, Slade pops into a bookies to place a bet on a horse. As they meet up outside Holly's apartment building and run inside, Danny crashes his car when he swerves to miss them. So it was Holly and Slade who caused the crash. They get back to the time machine with only a few seconds to spare. In just moments, they have returned to the present, and Holly points out that Slade's head injury is gone. And this is due to parallel dimensions. She says, "You weren't injured when you left, so you're not injured now."
Back at the station, Slade shows Grissom a charge sheet. He has arrested Mark Redding for the murder of Guy Lombard. As Redding is brought in, he sees Slade. He calls him Wilson, and is amazed to find out that Slade's a detective, not the caterer. Slade then explains how Redding committed the murder.
Lombard was already dead at 2 o'clock. Mark Redding had shot him using a silenced gun a few minutes earlier.
But everybody heard one shot at 2 o'clock.
No, that was the second shot. Redding sets everything up to look like suicide. Key in the pocket, doors and windows locked. He then fires a second shot, this time without a silencer, to bring Barbara and Michael Lombard into the room.
And where's he?
He's hiding behind the door. There was an alcove next to the shelving unit, so Barbara and Michael don't see him as they come into the room and up to the body. A moment later, he steps out, and it looks like he's just followed them in.
Grissom is impressed, but can't understand how Slade worked it all out. He tells her it was from seeing the broken lamp.
Later, we see Slade and Holly in an expensive restaurant celebrating. Holly wonders how Slade could afford it. He then tells her of the bet he placed while they were traveling back in time. But when he pulls a betting receipt from his pocket, it's blank. Holly explains that he couldn't do that since you can't change the past. If he hadn't placed the bet in real time, he couldn't go back in time, place the bet, and expect to win.
This is going to cost you a fortune. How can you afford to pay for it on your salary?
Oh, I meant to tell you. I just happened to be passing a betting shop while we were away on our travels. Mr. Cass, 40-1. How could I resist?
It doesn't work like that. Putting money on a horse knowing the result. You couldn't know the result because the race hadn't run yet. It's a paradox. So, that's a blank piece of paper. I did warn you. Time has rules, just like the rest of life. It won't let you cheat, and nor will I.
And that concludes the first episode of Crime Traveler, Jeff Slade and the Loop of Infinity. On the next episode, Jeff and Holly travel back in time to deal with a death in the family. Well, that is the first episode of Crime Traveler. Now, Andy, the one thing that I noticed about this that I really liked is I didn't notice any plot holes. In other words, something happened but then wasn't resolved later, like the car crash.
Yeah, that was kind of interesting about the episode is by the end, everything was connected and everything kind of tied up neatly at the end. And you saw, the car crash, for example, that it turns out that they had caused it. And yeah, everything tied up pretty neatly.
Now, there were some things that I had questions about, some little issues, and that is, you remember at the first of the episode when Slade is going to chase after Silberman, then he jumps on that motorcycle. Well, the motorcycle is conveniently parked on the sidewalk right by the entrance of the building. Who parks their motorcycle right by the front door? Then the other thing was, instead of immediately taking off after Silberman's car, Slade actually takes the time to put on the motorcycle helmet.
Well, something that I kind of thought was funny during that first scene where they're kind of on their stakeout or whatever it's called, they're all sitting and, they're sitting at the tables and they're talking to each other on the walkie-talkies. I think it was, Slade said, "Something's wrong. He's on to us." and I just thought, well, hello, you're talking into these like gigantic, 2-foot-long walkie-talkies. Of course the guy's going to think something's going on. There's like 4 people like talking in big walkie-talkies.
Yeah. And that's what, especially that shot of Nikki where he had the big walkie-talkie. Who wouldn't spot that? You're right.
Right. And it's like they're confused why this guy is thinking that something's up.
Couple other things I noticed, and that was when Holly is asked by Danny about the bi-dimensional transmuter. You remember what her reply was? Yeah, it's for drying her hair. Now, we assume that's supposed to be funny, but it gives us the impression, first of all, that either Danny is really stupid or that Holly is just playing up some sexist stereotype.
It seemed a little strange that, okay, so he has this package for her, and he says, the delivery man told me it was a blah, blah, blah transmuter thing. Like, when does the UPS guy come to your house and say, here, I've got a package for you? It's,
yeah, it's a bi-dimensional transmuter. When does the delivery man know what you're getting? Then you remember back at police headquarters when Slade is asking Holly how she could have gotten to the train station and back so fast. Did you notice she contradicted herself? First, she said she got lucky with traffic. And then seconds later, she denies even going to the train station.
Oh, I didn't catch that.
And there were several instances of foreshadowing in this episode. Like at first when Morris and Slade are talking about betting on the horses, then Slade passes the guy at the betting establishment. Slade is going to take advantage of this knowledge when he goes back in time and he's going to place a bet on the horse.
That's true.
Another thing that I noticed was in the kitchen when Holly's attempting to make the souffle. Don't you think that was a little over the top? She said she doesn't know how to cook. But don't you think it was a little over the top to also have her burn the toast?
Yeah,
that's kind of like we know you can't cook, but you can't even make toast, right?
Right, which kind of leads you to think, if she can't operate a toaster, I'm going to trust this woman to operate a time machine.
Yeah, exactly. When Slade and Holly escape from the mansion in the caterer's van, the one thing that I noticed was the van is parked facing away from the house. But did you notice when they originally drove up to the house, they parked it facing the house. So sometime between the time they arrived and the time they left, the van got turned around.
I didn't catch that one. Interesting.
Yeah. And at the end of the episode, when Slade goes to pay at the restaurant, and he pulls out what he thinks is that receipt from betting on the winning horse. You remember the receipt's blank. Holly tells him, how can you expect to do it? But the one thing I wondered was, did he really expect to pay for dinner with a betting receipt? You'd think he would have tried to cash in the receipt before going to the restaurant.
Good point.
And Andy, I had one last question. This is never really addressed in the series. And one thing that I thought about afterwards, that is, you don't know how far back the time machine is going to send you. How can you guarantee that it won't send you back at some point where you actually, let's say you were in your apartment eating dinner? How do you know that it won't send you back to that point? And as you exit the time machine, well, there you are in the kitchen eating dinner. How do you avoid running into yourself.
Exactly. And, with them not knowing how far back the machine is going to send them, I mean, usually it's, hours or maybe a day or something. But, what if it one time sent them back like a year? They would have to basically wait an entire year before they could get back to the present. You know what I mean? Because they get back to the apartment and then they sort of have to wait till the time runs out and then they go back to where they left, right?
That's true. I didn't think about what would happen if it would send you back really far. And truthfully, off the top of my head, I can't remember if Holly ever says anything about the fact that there is a limit on how far back. But that's a good point. Maybe somebody else might have picked up on that, but I didn't pick up on it. So I guess it's possible that you could get on one of those time travel trips where you could go back really far and you're stuck there for what could be years.
I mean, I'm assuming in the show that's kind of limited to a couple days or something, but something else I was kind of wondering, and I don't know if they go back and address this later in the series or not, but Holly says that her dad who built the time machine got trapped in the loop of infinity because he didn't make it back to the apartment in time?
That's the presumption, is he didn't get back in time. And so he's just stuck reliving whatever time, like if he went back 6 hours, he's just stuck reliving those 6 hours over and over and over.
Right. And that's what I thought was kind of interesting is her dad, it's not like he died or something. He still exists, but he's stuck within that day or those hours living it over and over. So it's almost like he's having a Groundhog Day experience where he's just doing the same thing over and over.
That's true. I think I read somewhere online that if the series had continued, they would have dealt more with Holly's father and his being trapped in that loop of infinity. But since the series never continued beyond these 8 episodes, we never really have any way of knowing what would have happened and how this all would have played out. But I thought the series, even after I watched the first episode, I thought this series has a lot of potential. It's not like your typical time travel type of show. There's not a lot of paradoxes. There's not a lot of chances for a paradox. And there's not a chance to mess up time. Have you ever seen the movie The Butterfly Effect?
No, but I know the concept.
He keeps going back in time and changing things, and there's always some detrimental side effect until finally he gets things good enough to leave it alone. That sort of thing doesn't happen with Crime Traveler. It's kind of cool concept that you can go back. You can be there, but you're more as a witness and not somebody who can actually tamper with events.
That, even when they do try to tamper with events, it usually ends up playing out that they...
Right. In some way, something they did actually contributed to the crime being committed. And
right, exactly.
And so in a lot of ways, maybe they had to be there for it to happen in the first place.
Yeah, kind of interesting.
Anyway, that's our first episode of Crime Traveler. I'm looking forward to the next few episodes, and the next one is kind of more personal in that it has to do with, I believe it's a murder involving someone in Holly's family. But it, too, is also a really good episode of Crime Traveler. Oh, it's been fun, Andy. I think we're going to have fun doing these TV Lounge podcasts, and I think it's going to be fun to look in particular at more Crime Traveler.
Yeah, me too.
I will see you next time for the next edition of the TV Lounge podcast.
See you later.
Thanks for joining us in the TV Lounge. We'd love to hear your thoughts and comments as well. You can email us, the tvloungepodcast@gmail.com, or visit the website and leave a comment. We're at tvloungepodcast.blogspot.com. See you next time here in the TV Lounge.